I think it came out of left field for a lot of Canadians, and our response was to stop buying Heinz ketchup. I don't think that's really the response that we need as Canadians right now. I think we need to have adult conversations about the adult things that are happening.
Welcome to The Flow, Real Estate and Money Show, a show focused on helping Canadians understand the different elements of real estate, mortgage, and finance. The goal of our show is to provide Canadians with the tools, information, and knowledge to have more success when it comes to their investing and real estate related decisions going forward. My name is Alex McFadyen, and I'm your host. I can't wait to get you into the flow.
You know what I kind of want to talk about is the only thing that is, there's only two things in the market right now that we talk about. Economically speaking, it's Trump and tariffs, right?
Sure.
All day long. And real estate wise, well, the center of Canada is Toronto, right? So all we hear about is condos and condos and empty condos and empty condos and empty condos. It's driving me crazy. But should we even be talking about that?
I think we have to talk about that. Like, even coming here tonight, knowing who I was talking to, you're one of those people that is always searching for, where's the opportunity? Like, you don't want to hear about bad news. You want to find out where the opportunity is. And I'm like, sometimes it's just bad news, Alex. Of course, there's opportunities. There's opportunities all over the place, but we also have to be realistic about the bad news. The bad news is that we're seeing very low sales ratios in a lot of the major metropolitan areas across Canada. Sales ratio is basically just your inventory divided by the number of homes actually selling. So let's say there's 10 properties that hit the market in a month. One of them sells. That would be a 10% sales ratio. That sales ratio would be right on the border between a buyer's market and a balanced market. So not to get too geeky for you, the sales ratios when the market was absolutely ripping.
Talk geeky to me.
We were talking like 100% sales ratios. So let's say not 10 properties hit the market, 50 properties hit the market, and all 50 of them sell. That was the market that we experienced a few years ago. Now, just a lower sales ratio means it's taking a little bit more time, a little bit more finesse, and navigating the market is a little bit more difficult. And I would consider that like objectively bad news if you're trying to put a real estate transaction together. There are still opportunities, but I like your question. I like where you're starting because it means that we're honestly having to be very straightforward with people about what you're leaping into if you're leaping into a real estate transaction right now in Canada.
Wow. Okay, that was good.
It's good to be honest.
I like it. I appreciate the energy behind that answer and the thoughtfulness, because it sounds like an answer that you've really brought up a few times lately.
Well, I've had to, because if people are carrying expectations from a few years ago into a transaction today, and those expectations aren't challenged and pressed, they're heading for a train wreck.
Well, let me ask you this question. Let's go back to the core topic that's coming up all the time right now, which, as I mentioned, okay, so we're on the West Coast. We're today, Fraser Valley. We're sitting in Langley. And the topic is not quite as impactful as it is in Toronto. But again, the news articles carry the thought process that we have thousands and thousands of empty condos and nothing is selling anywhere.
Well, really, that's just an inventory question, right? Like what you're expressing there is we have a lot of inventory and less demand. And that is what's being reflected in the low sales ratios that I was reflecting upon, right? It's a beast that isn't just, cornered in Ontario, but it's a beast that's raised its head here as well. So generally, the higher price point you go, the lower sales ratio you're going to have, higher inventory, lower demand. And the closer to the city you go, at least for a good period of time, the higher the inventory, the lower the demand.
Sure. Okay, well, let's talk anecdotally right now. Okay, so we're in 2025, January. If you remember a year ago, in 2024, we started pretty hot, right?
Yep, we did.
Low inventory. There was nothing selling, nothing in the marketplace, but everything was selling until, I don't know, February or March. When
I'd say we got a decent spring market all the way through till like April, May.
Okay. And then everything just turned off.
Well, so this has been the biggest problem is that we've felt for 2 or 3 years now, a decent market is coming. Demand is building. We obviously, and you would have been front row seat on this, you saw how the climbing interest rates just obliterated a lot of people's purchasing power. And you can understand that. Well, I'm sure we can all understand that. About a year ago, as the rates were coming down, the objection, to use like ugly sales language that I very rarely use, but let's just use the language, the objection moved from the interest rates are too high to I'm worried about my job. My relationship status is in flux right now. I'm going through a brutal divorce, or I'm being transferred at work because, my business is being moved to the United States, or whatever it is. There's so many things going on right now where the objections stopped being, the interest rates are too high, and it just became, I'm really uncertain. And then you throw in like the macro level economic side of it, and you've got a president to the south who just every morning seems to wake up and announce a new thing and throws whole countries into turmoil. And I'm not pro-Trump, I'm not anti-Trump. It's just the reality is that we have this factor who it's like, we thought we were heading for a spring market here. And then all of a sudden this tariff talk came out of nowhere. And a lot of people threw the brakes on. We then had snowfall in British Columbia. And when it's snowing in BC, people don't want to leave.
Hold on a second. When it's snowing in Vancouver area.
Very true.
Area.
Very true. Because I know you have listeners across Canada. So a little bit of context for those listeners. If we get like 2 inches, there are people whose whole weekends are canceled.
Done.
So that was like a little bit of a like micro level impact on the market too. So I think there was a lot of like really good positivity, market sentiment building into 2025. We then had the Trump tariff factor thing hit us. Then we got like a few inches of snow, and all of a sudden now people are like, where did the spring market go? Meanwhile, it's like barely mid-February. So I think it's going to be okay. But honestly, like we've been saying for years now, sentiment is going to improve, sentiment is going to improve. And there just seems to be thing after thing after thing that's keeping those sales ratios low.
Okay, so let's be specific from an anecdotal perspective, because obviously you are a part of a large brokerage and talk to a lot of agents every day. So what is moving, if anything? Is anything selling?
Entry level, everything.
Entry level, everything.
So the further you get from entry level, the lower the sales ratio is going to be, which is indicative of a bad market.
Okay.
Right? So, but entry level everything, like entry level condo, entry level manufactured homes, in fact, to start there. Entry level manufactured homes, entry level condos, entry level townhouses, entry level single family with a suite. And you can kind of pick your pricing category there, right? Like $500,000 condo, $850,000 townhouse, $1.2 million single family home, $1.5 million single family home with suite. That stuff is all still moving at reasonable sales ratios between 20 and 50%, depending on neighborhood, price point, and other factors.
And what out of all those, because entry level makes me think about first time buyer.
Yep.
Are you seeing a larger uptick, at least based on the people you're talking to, like first time buyers? Are they back? Because last year they were gone.
First time buyers, in my experience anyway, by the tail end of 2023, so kind of heading into 2024, which you were referencing like the spring market there, tail end of 2023, we did 10 sales to first-time buyers in the fourth quarter. So they were beginning to come back about a year ago, and I think they remain in the market. We have a first-time buyer seminar coming up in partnership with a local university, and we have never struggled to get people out to that. And one of the things that we try and do as a company is try to give people hope that you actually can get on the ladder. This whole idea that like first-time buyers aren't buying because they eat too much avocado toast, we've talked about it before, like it's complete nonsense. What had to happen and what has happened in my experience is expectations changed. So it's been years and years since I had a first-time buyer with an expectation that I'm going to purchase the kind of home that my parent lives in.
Yeah.
It began dropping to like, maybe I can reach to a townhouse, right? And then about 5 years ago, it was like, maybe I can stretch to a condo. And that's what they're doing. And they're satisfied with it. And they're beginning to build equity and a financial future through that.
That's a fair point. And hope, obviously, is everything. What I've noticed, particularly in the last 3 months and this year already, so we're in the beginning of February of 2025, middle of February 2025, I've already noticed a significant uptake on first-time buyers who had maybe started the conversation in 2024, maybe middle, maybe the beginning, who are back and taking action, despite all those things that you've spoken about right there. And you're right. As soon as the snow came, as soon as the Trump tariffs got serious, it was like the tap turned off for people reaching out, except for one thing, which is first-time buyers.
Do you know why though? Like you're seeing this as much as I am. Generally, if a first-time buyer is in their early, mid, even late 20s, all the way up to their early 30s, like at this point, some of the economic realities probably aren't hitting them that hard yet, right? It's they haven't owned a property previously, so they weren't getting absolutely demolished by higher interest rates. So that's one thing. They probably have relatively entry-level to mid-level employment position. So it's not like they're that top tier C-suite executive that the company shareholders are looking at now being like, Jim Bob's overpaid and we can't do the $2 million bonus anymore. Like, that's not first time buyers either. Generally, they're not quite married yet. They might be a little bit more flexible on their relational status as well. So it's not like they're having all their relationships completely blow up.
Hold on, you questioning relational status here? What's going on?
They might also have like less responsibility in general, likely. If you're a first time buyer, we do have first time buyers with children, but more often than not, they don't have children yet. So a little bit less responsibility, a little bit less concern about the economy in general. So I feel like first time buyers just have less exposure to some of the macro level economic stuff that is crumbling generations.
So what I'm hearing from you is it's almost more of a psychological consideration.
It's very much a psychological consideration.
Okay.
How much risk can I afford to take? And if
Right.
you're younger, generally the answer to the question is more.
Okay. Now, but if you're a first time buyer in 2025, if we rewind it back in 2024, we brought out new transfer tax exemptions in BC. So now you have the ability to buy a home up to 830 and a partial exemption up to 860. So save $8,000.
All of a sudden, it actually began having an impact in the British Columbian and Ontarian environment.
We've had that. We've now had the FHSA for a few years now, so you could have accumulated more space there. The first home savings account. Okay. Yep. So we've got the first home savings account now for a couple of years, investing in that. A lot of people have started to take advantage of that, right? Tax-free. Obviously, we've had the RSPs for a long time. It's like $60,000 now, which I don't know who has $60,000 in RSP for a first-time buyer. But anyways, I digress.
But sometimes it is people with like companies that are matching or whatever else. Like if you're in a company like that and the company is matching it, dollar for dollar, you can begin growing that RSP quicker than you could something else. So
there's that. In addition to that, we've got the 30-year amortizations for first-time buyers on all properties that have come out. Like there's more to it, but so you mentioned a psychological consideration. I think we have the psychological consideration, but we also have a real situation where first-time buyers are like, well, I can actually qualify for more money right now. So by you saying the bottom is where people are buying, I think the big question for people that they would want to know is, does that mean that the bottom or the floor is going to get raised or it's starting to get raised?
It is. I refer to it and have done with clients for years as like an accordion. Like in a market like this, the prices all begin to accordion where the lower end begins pushing up because of higher sales ratios and the upper end begins kind of retreating because of lower sales ratios. Higher sales ratios are going to lead to price appreciation or at least stability. Lower sales ratios are generally going to lead to depreciation. So that's all the prices in each category are generally accordioning right now. Everything's getting closer. Okay.
So psychologically speaking, our first-time buyers, they're back in the market. They also have access to these rules. Let's stay on these rules for a second here. Specifically the CMHC 30-year amortization.
Yeah.
Because obviously I talk about this every single day when we're doing pre-approvals, when we're pre-qualifying for people. We can say, hey, you can qualify for just about 8% more money from this one thing alone.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding the downward pressure on interest rates that have obviously come about. How much are you hearing people talk about these different guidelines and rules?
I think the extended amortization for people that have less than 20% down is benefiting younger people because, they have 30 years to pay off that mortgage. They're going to be working for 30 years to do so. I also think it benefits those that didn't have that as an opportunity for them when they originally purchased. Maybe their property values have remained neutral or maybe even pulled back a little bit. And they're in a position for these macro level economic, reasons where they perhaps have to refinance. And now they can refinance up to 30-year amortization, buying themselves a little bit more room on a monthly level. I think it's helping both of those categories of people right now.
Well, that begs an interesting question. I know we're going off track here, but I'm going to put a pin in it.
We're way off track and more into your world than my world.
Yeah, we're doing good. We're doing good. Okay, so let's stay on that first point. The first-time buyer exemption, or I guess new property exemption for CMHC mortgages. Okay, let's break it all down. You put down less than 20%. As of December 15th of 2024, you can actually purchase a property and do a 30-year amortization on any property if you're a first-time buyer or a new development if you're an existing buyer. Yep. I want to ask you about that. Have you had anyone ask you about doing a 30-year amortization for a insured mortgage on a new property who's not a first-time buyer?
Not yet.
Okay, yeah, I figured as much.
I'm generally anti-presale anyway.
Ooh, it's a hot take. We should get into that in a second here, but let's talk about that 30
developers might listen.
anti-presale. Well, we need presales. We still need development.
Yeah.
30-year amortizations. Have you had very many people actually bring this up to you?
Not yet.
No. Like nobody, like, okay, first-time buyers, what do they bring up? Do they bring up anything benefit-wise? Do they know of FHSA? Do they know about PTT exemptions?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have as an industry right now is some of these programs are genuinely good programs, but the average consumer is overwhelmed with this change and that change and a new program and a new tax and a new, like, it's very, very difficult for people right now to plan out their financial future.
So you're saying,
without having good professionals around them that are actually keeping up on some of the changes and are able to look at the scenario as a whole.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, to this day, I talk to people who followed me on Instagram for 6 months before they reach out, or watch me on YouTube for 3 months or something like that, and then reach out to me. And they don't know about a significant amount of the changes and exemptions and rule changes, and I can't blame them.
Well,
because
when you publish 600 videos a day like you do, and maybe
5.
20 of those 600 videos were about the changes. No, like, I get it. People, but that's kind of my point, is that people are overwhelmed by content. They're overwhelmed by a lot of the changes. That's one of the reasons why, with our approach, we actually try and get down to the nuts and bolts of individual situations, because generic advice isn't really cutting it anymore.
it's not going to work. Okay, speaking of which, back to my world, you brought it up, Mr. T. Not the Mr. T that we're thinking of with Mohawk. The other Mr. T down south of the border has caused a lot of friction. And I don't think we need to get into a big dialogue about what has happened, but more specifically what that impact has meant to the psychology of the real estate market.
Sentiment. It's all been sentiment. So
Okay.
I said it earlier, like, front end of the year, the way the data was lining up and everything, it looked like, okay, we're going to have a pretty early spring market. And then President Trump started talking about tariffs. And I think it came out of left field for a lot of Canadians. And our response was to stop buying Heinz ketchup. And I'm like, I don't think that's really the response that we need as Canadians right now. I think we need to have adult conversations about the adult things that are happening in the room.
So out of the buyers and sellers that you're talking to, how many of them, first and foremost, reference this as it relates to their buying decisions?
The people that watch the news.
Okay.
They're the only people that are really talking about it right now. Like, that's where the market sentiment has been impacted most. It would be 30 to 40 years old plus, still consuming a lot of mainstream media. They are terrified. They have moved to kind of the sidelines. The younger folks are just like, oh, the guy that we were used to being the president of the United States is back as the president of the United States doing the crazy stuff that he's always done. They're like, we're going to keep going. Thank you very much. But a lot of the more mature Canadians who are consuming a lot of mainstream media, they really are pretty spooked by this whole thing. And they've been told that adjusting what you purchase at the grocery store is a solution. And that's given them a little bit of a sense of control. But like, in reality, they're just terrified because they're being told to be terrified.
Yeah, and without going down the too much of the macroeconomics of the situation, the psychology of the situation is what I find quite interesting.
And
at this
they
point right
do
now.
have reason to be scared.
Sure.
They absolutely have reason to be scared. I'm just not confident that our solutions being provided right now are useful solutions.
Right. Okay. You mentioned that the first-time buyers or that age crowd is the one that's not really paying attention
It's not
to
having
this.
too much of an impact. I mean, the likelihood is they're probably not a steel worker. You know, they're probably not in the auto industry, which is where the current tariffs that today we're being told are landing on us. And it could be different tomorrow, and it could be different in 3 weeks, and it could be different whenever. Like, they're generally not the ones being impacted by the kind of tariffs that we're talking about.
Right.
Now, those tariffs go on long enough, they will be impacted by them. But for now, they're not really feeling it.
So you said it before, I'm the opportunity guy. And that to me smells like a potential opportunity in the marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. It really does depend. I like the idea of flexibility right now. Like, you and I just renewed my mortgage, and I went variable because we just don't know if interest rates are going to 1. We don't know if they're going to 10. We have our ideas. We can follow the bond markets. But then the bond markets are changing on a daily basis as well. Like, I was listening to a podcast on artificial intelligence on the way over here. NVIDIA, when, is it DeepSeek, the new Chinese AI that was launched? They lost 17% of their market cap overnight.
Overnight,
It was
yeah.
over $1 trillion. Like, those are the kind of, like, that would have previously been considered a massive black swan event. That's just normal now.
Yeah.
So a lot of the younger folks are just tuning this noise out, and they're going to do what they're going to do.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear that, because you talk about how, which is probably not true. When I say the word younger, I don't know, like under 40, maybe, like if we're trying to like pick an age, but like
Our age.
Yeah.
I keep that. Why is it that the younger people keep getting younger though? I don't know, man.
Fuck.
Yeah, they look like 8-year-olds. I'm like, I have people now that I'm selling properties to that were born in the 2000s.
Yeah. Well,
I'm impressed by them, but that's crazy.
So like Gen Z, if we
Okay.
look at that, so that's like, anywhere between, I think it's like 23 to 32 right now, or 24 to 32, somewhere in that ballpark. Believe it or not, like that's Gen Z right now. And the feedback around Gen Z is obviously they're stuck in their phones, they can't communicate, they're not social, but they're more tuned in than ever, which is interesting to know that if they're more tuned in than ever and they seem less scared by what's going on, does that mean there's a lack of connection?
Generally, they're, like in my experience, talking with that generation, generally they're a lot more open to what is actually going on, and they're generally going to do a little bit more of their own research, a little bit more of their own study, rather than just being told you should be terrified right now.
Okay.
Because their trust in authority has been undermined since they were children.
Right. Well, I want to bring this back a little bit, because a big thing that I like to focus on as it relates to the show as a whole is the money side of things. And we can't deny that the macro and microeconomics of a tariff situation, whether it be small or big, will have an impact on people's money. And real estate being Canadian, obviously being in Canada, let's try this one more time, real estate is the number one source of our funds. The question that begs to be asked is, with everything going on and with what appears to be, even if it was unintentional, like a chain effect with our country, it's like Trump saying 25% tariffs. Yeah, we might not agree. We stopped eating ketchup and orange juice or whatever it is, started buying Canadian. It seems to have changed the way that people are also thinking in our country, all automatically. And I think even if that doesn't happen, I actually believe that it could impact our culture and a lot of the decisions that are made by Canadian companies moving forward. Moving back to that, when people are thinking buying real estate, when they're thinking of getting into the marketplace, the money side of things for the last 15, 20 years has been a big part of that. Mm-hmm. Investments. We're putting our money into the markets right now. Really what I'm curious from your perspective is, do you think that this shift changes the way that people think about putting their money into real estate versus the stock market? Do they want to pile even more money in?
I had a conversation with a investment purchaser. So we purchased a place in Langley last year together. They were actively acquiring local British Columbian rental real estate as a part of their investment portfolio. I had the phone call with them on Thursday or Friday, and she said, David, the reason we've not been in touch is it just doesn't make so much sense to us right now with all the additional taxes and everything else, and things between landlords and tenants getting a little bit more awkward, and there being a seeming like substantial power imbalance there. That client at least went to the sidelines. So I think if there's an opportunity here, it would be that many investors are leaving the Vancouver and Metro Vancouver marketplace there because they're not seeing the cap rates that they wanted to see, that they're not seeing the return on the investment, and Ontario, Toronto in particular as well. A lot of those investors were willing to take the hit on the cap rate and on the cash flow because they were anticipating appreciation. When that appreciation began to not materialize, and when the expectation of future appreciation has been ratcheted down from certainly where it was, where real estate was doubling every few years, right? Like that expectation is kind of gone now. So there's less competition with investors, and I kind of like that for purchasers. If you're not competing with an investor, it's one less person to compete with. It's also someone that pretty much inevitably, if they've been doing this for a period of time, has deeper pockets than you do as well. So if they can toss on the extra 10 grand, 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever it is, it didn't really matter to them too much. So I think that is one of the benefits of this, is that we have less speculation picking up new inventory that's hitting the market.
Specifically in BC.
Specifically in BC. Yeah.
Okay, but are those people putting their money elsewhere?
those people don't have much money anymore. Those people don't have as much.
The investors that were going to invest here.
The investors that were going to invest here, where are they putting their money? Sometimes back into their own businesses.
Yeah.
But honestly, like when we were talking about 2000, 2001, 2022, there was a lot of free money, cheap money, just sloshing around. People got stuck at home. They weren't spending as much. They weren't going on the foreign vacation because they couldn't get on an airplane or whatever it is, right? Like there was a lot more money sloshing around. Since then, there's been a tightening, like a monetary tightening, and people have been like equally tightening their own belts. They're spending less. They're also paying more in taxes, and the cost of living has gone up massively.
Yeah.
There's less disposable.
I'm going to go back on this because I told you I would. We went back on this thing. You mentioned earlier on that you don't love pre-sales or you're not a big fan of them. The pre-sale market obviously has been in the news a lot the last number of years.
Sure.
Number of years. And I'd say the pre-sale market kind of got victimized when it shouldn't have in many ways, because there's nothing inherently wrong with buying a pre-sale property.
No, I think pre-sales are really important. I think developers are really important. I think we need more inventory. More inventory is an absolutely enormous part of the picture here to make living more affordable.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because the pre-sale demand side of the equation has dropped so substantially for all the reasons that we're giving, builders are mothballing projects or going bankrupt or failing to complete or whatever it is, which is slowing down the inventory, the supply side of the equation for us, which is a problem. So I'm not like anti-developer. What I don't like when it comes to the consumer-facing side of things within the pre-sale industry is the contracts. I don't like the contracts. I think it puts way too much power in the developer's hands. They're, often using contracts that have been drafted by their own lawyers. And there's certain clauses in there that even in, nearly a decade in the industry, I began seeing more and more clauses that I felt were just a little bit, they were giving too much power to the developer, particularly around 2020, 2021, where there were legitimate supply issues with certain construction materials and that kind of thing. They were drafting like carte blanche clauses into the contracts that were like, if we have a supply side issue on securing anything, pretty much, we can do whatever we want. Like just carte blanche clauses in the contract.
I experienced that in our townhouse, actually. So
exactly. So I'm very transparent and straightforward with people. I think as well, one of the reasons why I'm a little bit off on pre-sales right now is GST being payable on pre-sales. When that could change if we see a change in government in the next year or so. One of the things that Polyev has talked about is removing the GST from a pre-sale purchase. I had a client, I emailed them today about this. They sent me a development in Cloverdale, just like a smaller little town in the city of Surrey. And I told them, I was like, guys, I would hate to sell you this condo for, with 5% GST if it's being sold midway through next year without GST being payable. That would be kind of painful.
Wouldn't that be wouldn't they go back on that? If it wasn't built till next year, GST may not be collected anymore, no?
Not necessarily. And I don't trust anything.
Yeah, it's government. So,
capital gains, right? Like the capital gains exemption was a big one for us. That undermined a lot of trust with people. We sold so many properties in April, May, June of last year before the capital gains increase was supposed to come into effect.
Yeah.
People made life-altering decisions to unload their investment portfolios.
Yeah. And
then it was never passed in Parliament, still isn't passed in Parliament, and probably now won't be passed in Parliament. But CRA continued levying it on people.
Yeah.
That's undermined trust.
Let's stick on the pre-sales for one more minute.
Yep.
I know we're kind of way off track here.
No, that's okay.
This is the right way to go. The pre-sale conversation is an interesting one to have because obviously we know what's happened in Toronto with investors. We know that people bought it speculating on properties. Like this is nothing new. We're not telling anybody new. But the pre-sale market is a very important part of filling out the demand side of things, supply side of things.
The supply side, yeah. It's enormous.
To cover the demand we have. I think the challenge that people have as it relates to pre-sale, and I don't know if there's an easy way to fix this, but I mean, we know what happens, unfortunately, behind the scenes in the industry, and this is where it gives guys like real estate agents that are honest, a bad look, or a sales center because it's in the real estate market. Is we see these people power dialing all day long to get folks to put deposits on pre-sales and sell the world to them.
So
and
my client that walked into the one in Cloverdale today,
yeah,
she said in the email, she's like, I gave them my details. I've had calls from like 3 realtors already.
yeah.
So like there are some people that have built their business model around this, and there are some people who have like fairly reasonably responsibly built their business model around this.
Yeah.
And then there are other people who are just looking to get your name on a contract, come anything. Like they just don't care about the client.
Yeah, I agree. I think pre-sales are not the enemy, and new developments and so forth are obviously very important and very vital.
Necessary. I just would like the contracts to be a little bit less favorable to the developers and more favorable to my clients.
Yes, I think that's a fair point. I think we don't want to play both sides too much. It's just like one of those things.
Well, they need each other.
It's we do, and we need to see them happen. And I think the thing that's interesting in all this is that based on what you just said to me, if we see a massive slowdown in the amount of these pre-sales and these developments because of a lack of interest.
I'm worried about the supply side.
There you go. 5 years from now, we're going to have a serious issue. And it's nothing to do with realtors or any of that kind of stuff. It's the developers that we need won't be putting their boots or their shovels in the ground anymore because they just don't have any incentive to do so.
Yeah.
So,
but it's the permitting process, and there's a few other things that can change there that potentially, again, if we've got some adults in the room making big boy decisions or big girl decisions, then hopefully we can begin seeing the permitting process speeding up, being a little bit less costly to the consumer, not everything being passed down to that prospective purchaser. That would actually help affordability.
Yeah.
That would actually incentivize developers to build again. But right now there's just like a cluster of reasons why it's getting increasingly difficult for developers.
So let's look ahead 3 months from now, crystal ball, because I know you got that crystal ball hanging out right now.
Yeah.
Where does the market move based on what you can see? Again, I know that Trump's going to make a new decision tomorrow, a new announcement tomorrow. We'll see. But for the sake of conversation, with the information that we have today, just with the information we have today, where do you think the market unfolds to, let's say, the first half of 2025?
Well, that's where most of the transaction volume has been for the last few years. So it was very, very odd in 2020 when, for obvious reasons, the seasonality of the market got really out of whack. And then after 2020, 2021, 2022, we returned to a pretty extreme seasonality where we had the quietest Decembers I ever saw, and we had the quietest Augusts I ever saw, because people were so fatigued from everything going on in their life that by the time August and December rolled around, they were just like, we're doing nothing. We're going on vacation with the family. We're hunkering down. We're going to bake cookies or whatever you're doing through December. Like, the seasonality became more pronounced. So there was like a loss of seasonality for a while as there was all this money sloshing around and everybody was doing great. And then the economy began to really show what, essentially an effect of all that free money that was out there. We're now experiencing the hangover, and people, because they were struggling a little bit more and that kind of thing, really needed to go to the sidelines. So all that to say, I think by April, May, we will know, did we have a solid spring market? Because I think a huge portion of the transactions that are due to happen in 2025, if it's anything like 2024, will be in the spring. The fall has been quieter. The fall has been quieter for the last 2 years.
So you think everything's going to clump together 2 months from now? We're just going to see it blow up?
I think so.
Fireworks?
Yeah, and we can tell from like our leading indicators, and I know that you track all this as well, like people reaching out to us and leads and all that salesy language. We can see it. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, come May, June, when the sun comes out and people are fatigued from everything that's going on, they are peacing out, and we're going to probably have a very quiet summer.
Yeah.
Again, unless there's like major macro stuff going on.
Yeah. So go VFC.
Go VFC.
Let's go, baby.
If you've not been following Vancouver Football Club, I love that you set this up for me. We did not talk about this. Vancouver Football Club are based in Langley at the Langley Event Centre, Willoughby Stadium there. CPL team, Canadian Premier League, top tier in Canada, 3rd season. Come on out, come watch us. I'm a massive fan and supporter and partner of the club.
Love it. Thanks for joining, man.
You're coming to a game this year.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Let's go.
Cheers,
Appreciate you, buddy.
Appreciate
All
you.
right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
That was an unreal episode of The Flow. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did on my side right here. If you haven't already done so, make sure to check out all of the incredible resources that we have available. You can find us on Instagram at Flow Mortgage Co. You can find us on our website, getflowmortgage.ca. And of course, don't forget our free first-time homebuyer masterclass that's currently available on our website for anyone who listens to the episodes. And if you loved what you listened here today, the only thing that we ask for is to share this with someone else that you think this could help. And hey, maybe leave us a great review online.